Welcome to the Psychological Safety Series for Nurses, brought to you by Healthcare Nurses Network and the Nurses Link Up app. This is the first episode of our 10-part series, dedicated to helping nurses create environments where trust, open communication, and collaboration thrive. In this episode, Psychological Safety, the Key to Thriving Relationships in Nursing and Beyond, based on an article by Dr. Nicolas Abella, we explore why psychological safety is more than a concept. It is necessary for teamwork, patient safety, and professional well-being. Guiding today's discussion are James Carter, BSN, RN, an ICU nurse accustomed to high-stakes patient care, and Emily Ramirez, MSN, RN, a nurse manager dedicated to fostering strong, supportive nursing teams. Together, they will cover why psychological safety matters in nursing, the cost of silence and its impact on patient care, the SAFE framework, a practical approach to building psychological safety in nursing teams. This series is designed to give you actionable strategies to strengthen your voice, support your colleagues, and elevate patient care. Let's dive into episode 1 and start shaping a culture of trust in nursing, one conversation at a time.
Welcome back to the Healthcare Nurses Network podcast. We're diving deep today into something that's so important for all of us in nursing, and that's psychological safety. It's all about making sure that we're working in a place where everyone, no matter what, feels like they can speak up, share their concerns, ask questions, without worrying about being judged or facing negative consequences.
Absolutely.
Really creating that environment where we can all learn and grow together.
You know, it's interesting because psychological safety goes way beyond just feeling comfortable at work.
Right.
It's really the foundation of trust and effective communication, not just in nursing, but, in any relationship that you think about.
That's so true.
It really is the bedrock.
And for this deep dive, we've got some amazing research and insights to share, all structured around something called the SAFE framework.
Exactly. And this framework gives us tangible steps,
Right.
real actions we can take to cultivate that sense of safety, whether you're a bedside nurse or a nurse leader.
I love that it's actionable.
Yeah.
So let's jump right in.
Let's do it.
Why should you, as a nurse, care about psychological safety?
Yeah.
Picture this. You're on a busy shift, and you see a potential medication error. What do? Do you speak up? Or does that little voice of fear kind of hold you back?
That hesitation that you might feel, that's a red flag.
Okay.
That's a sign that psychological safety might be missing in your workplace.
Right.
And I think we all get it. Healthcare is a pressure cooker.
Absolutely.
But the consequences of not speaking up can actually be way more serious.
Then speaking up.
Exactly.
I think we've all been there.
Mm-hmm.
But what actually happens when psychological safety takes a backseat?
Well, the research paints a pretty clear picture.
Okay.
We see an increase in medical errors.
Oh, wow.
Teams start to break down, nurses get burnt out and leave the profession.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it all boils down to a negative impact on patient care.
So this isn't just about warm and fuzzy feelings.
No.
It has real consequences that directly affect patients.
It's about recognizing that we all make mistakes. And the only way that we learn and grow from them is to create that safe space to address them.
Without punishment.
Exactly.
And that's where I think this SAFE framework comes into play.
That's right.
It's that roadmap
It is.
for building that culture of psychological safety.
Exactly. And it's built on 4 pillars.
Okay.
Speak up, active listening, feedback, and environment design.
Okay.
And each of these pillars, offers these practical strategies that nurses at all levels can really use to make a difference.
Starting today.
Yes.
So let's break it down.
Yes, do it.
Starting with speak up.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds simple enough,
Right?
but I think we all know how difficult it can be to actually voice those concerns.
Yeah.
Especially if you're worried about rocking the boat or, maybe facing consequences for speaking up.
You're right. It's not always easy, especially with those ingrained hierarchies we have in healthcare.
Right.
The fear of retaliation. But speaking up is absolutely crucial.
Okay.
Think about it. If you have a concern that you're holding back, just imagine that emotional burden that it creates.
Oh, yeah.
And over time, all those unaddressed concerns, they can really contribute to burnout,
It's almost like carrying around this extra weight
Right.
of just fear, fear of speaking up.
Exactly. And the research shows that those bottled up concerns,
Yeah.
they rarely lead to positive outcomes. They can
Huh.
actually lead to this culture of silence
Right.
where mistakes are just kind of swept under the rug
Mhm.
and those opportunities for improvement are missed.
So how can we kind of overcome those mental barriers and empower ourselves to actually speak up?
One really effective technique is using something called SBR,
Oh, yeah.
which stands for Situation, Background, Assessment, Recommendation,
Okay.
to structure your communication.
Hmm.
So imagine a nurse who notices a discrepancy in a medication order.
Right.
Instead of just going up to the doctor and saying, hey, something seems off.
She uses SBRR to lay it out, you know, clearly and objectively.
Okay, can you give me an example?
Sure. She could say, Dr. Smith, I'm calling about Mrs. Jones in room 202.
Okay.
She's scheduled for a dose of medication X, but her chart indicates an allergy to it.
Mm-hmm.
Could we review this together to ensure her safety?
Wow, that's a huge difference.
Yeah,
It's clear, it's concise, and it's really focused on the patient.
exactly.
It kind of takes the emotion out of it
It does.
and really makes it about that collaborative effort.
That's the power of SBR.
Yeah.
It helps you present your concerns in a way that, reduces that defensiveness
Right.
and increases the likelihood of a productive conversation.
So it's not about placing blame.
No.
It's about working together
Right.
to figure out what's best for the patient.
When we feel empowered to look up, in
Right.
this way,
Mm-hmm.
we shift from a culture of fear to a culture of learning and continuous improvement.
I love that.
Yeah.
But speaking up is only half of it, right?
We need someone on the other side who's ready to listen and really take those concerns seriously.
Absolutely. It's not enough to just encourage people to speak up. We also need to cultivate this culture of active listening.
Mm.
And that goes for everybody: bedside nurses, nurse leaders, administrators.
Yeah. Active listening, it seems so simple.
Right.
But I think in practice, on a busy shift, sometimes we miss that.
We do.
What makes active listening so crucial for psychological safety?
Well, think about a time when you felt truly heard and understood.
Mm-hmm.
It probably made you feel valued, respected,
Right.
more willing to open up.
Yeah.
Active listening really creates that safe space
Mhm.
for open and honest communication.
It validates you and it makes you
Correct.
feel like your voice matters.
Exactly. And when nurses feel heard, they're more likely to trust their colleagues and their leaders,
Right.
which strengthens teamwork and collaboration.
So it's not just about hearing the words, it's about understanding what's behind them.
It really is.
The emotions, the motivation.
It's about empathy and acknowledging the other person's perspective,
Mhm.
even if you don't agree with it.
Are there specific techniques or phrases that can help us become better active listeners?
Absolutely. One really simple but powerful technique is to reflect back what you're hearing.
Okay.
You could say something like, I hear you saying that you're concerned about the staffing levels on this shift. Is that
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, it shows that you're listening,
Exactly.
that you're paying attention.
And another incredibly valuable technique, especially for leaders, is to practice pausing before responding.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading about that.
Yeah.
It sounds so simple, but I feel like it could be so hard.
It takes conscious effort,
Yeah.
especially in a high-pressure environment, but that pause can be really transformative.
Mm-hmm.
It prevents those, knee-jerk reactions, allows you to really process what the other person is saying before you jump in.
So you're not just brushing them off.
Exactly. And that can make all the difference in building trust, creating that psychologically safe environment.
Okay, so we've covered speaking up and active listening, two essential parts of that safe framework.
Right.
But let's be honest, feedback can sometimes feel more like a threat than something helpful,
Mm-hmm.
especially in a field like healthcare where, the stakes are so high.
Yeah.
So how can we reframe feedback to make it a more positive force for growth and development?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah.
You hit the nail on the head. Feedback often gets, a bad rap, especially in healthcare where things are so intense.
Right.
But the key is to really shift our perspective and view feedback as a tool for growth, not a weapon for punishment.
Right.
That's a big shift.
So how do we make that shift? How do we
Right.
create a culture where feedback is something that we look forward to instead of fearing?
One approach that the research highlights is this concept of feed forward,
Oh,
which focuses on future solutions rather than dwelling on, what went wrong in the past.
okay. I'm intrigued. Tell me more about Feed Forward.
Yeah, so think about traditional feedback. It often focuses on what went wrong, whose fault it was, and that can leave people feeling pretty defensive and demoralized.
Right.
Feed forward is all about looking ahead. So instead of saying, you made a mistake documenting that patient's medication, you would say,
Yeah, what do you say?
you'd say something like, next time, let's try, using a double-check system with a colleague to make sure that our documentation is accurate.
Right.
It's about offering concrete suggestions for improvement, not dwelling on those past mistakes.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
It's a really subtle but powerful change.
It is.
It takes that sting out of the feedback
Right.
and turns it into a collaborative problem-solving process.
Exactly. And it fosters that sense of psychological safety where people feel like it's okay to receive feedback because they know it's coming from a place of support.
Okay. I'm seeing how this feed forward could be a real game changer.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the final pillar of the SAFE framework.
Okay.
Environment design. Yes.
It sounds pretty broad. What exactly does that entail?
Yeah, so this is where we zoom out a little bit.
Okay.
And we think about how to build psychological safety into the systems and structures of our workplaces.
So it's not enough to just talk about it.
No, it has to be a part of how we do things.
Right.
One way to do this is by starting meetings with a simple psychological safety check-in.
Okay. What would that look like?
You could ask, something like, does anyone have any concerns or anything they need to share before we get started?
Mm-hmm.
It just lets people know that their voices matter.
Right. Just that simple act sets the tone.
Yeah, and it can also, bring up potential issues early on.
Right. Get ahead of it.
Before they turn into bigger problems.
Yeah, and I think another key part of that environment design is having clear channels for reporting concerns.
Absolutely.
Even anonymously.
Especially anonymously.
Yeah, because some people might not feel comfortable going directly to a supervisor or manager.
That's right. Those anonymous channels provide that safety net.
So that people can speak up without fear of retribution.
Okay, I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about how psychological safety affects patient care,
Okay.
not just the nursing team.
Yeah, that's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
When nurses feel psychologically safe, they're more likely to speak up about potential errors,
Mm-hmm.
advocate for their patients' needs,
Yeah.
collaborate effectively with the whole healthcare team.
Right.
And that open communication is really key to catching those mistakes early,
Yeah.
preventing harm, and making sure patients are getting the best possible care.
It makes sense if you're constantly worried about being judged or punished for speaking up.
Right.
You're not going to say anything.
Exactly. And on the flip side, when nurses feel empowered to speak up,
Mm-hmm.
they're more likely to catch those little things that can become big problems later.
Right. So it's a safety net for everybody.
Absolutely. And it's not just about preventing those errors.
Mm-hmm.
When nurses feel valued and respected, they're also more likely to provide compassionate, patient-centered care.
It's about that human connection, that human touch.
Exactly. And patients can sense when their caregivers are stressed or feeling unsafe,
Right.
and that can make them anxious.
Yeah.
It can affect their trust in the care they're receiving.
So creating a psychologically safe environment for nurses creates a more healing environment for the patients.
Exactly. And that's why psychological safety should be a priority for all healthcare organizations.
Yeah, and speaking of priorities, I want to touch on nurse burnout.
Mm-hmm.
It's a huge problem. We all know this. But how does fostering psychological safety help with that?
Well, imagine working in an environment where you're constantly second-guessing yourself,
Right.
afraid to speak up, and feeling like you don't have support from your colleagues or your leaders.
It's a recipe for burnout.
It really is. It creates this constant stress and anxiety.
Yeah.
But when nurses feel psychologically safe, they're more likely to reach out for support when they're struggling, share their burdens with their colleagues,
Yeah.
advocate for their own well-being.
It's about creating that culture of support.
Right. It's about recognizing that nurses are human
Mm-hmm.
with emotions and needs.
I'm not robots.
No, we're not. And when we create a workplace that acknowledges those needs,
Yeah.
we create a more resilient workforce.
Yeah, and that leads to better patient care.
Absolutely. It's all connected.
I think some people might be listening and thinking, this sounds great, but what about the money?
Mm-hmm.
How do we convince administrators that investing in psychological safety is actually worth it?
That's a fair question, but the research actually shows that investing in psychological safety isn't just the right thing to do.
Okay.
It also makes financial sense.
Okay, tell me more.
When nurses feel safe to speak up about potential errors, hospitals see a decrease in medical errors, which means lower costs.
Right. Less malpractice claims, things like that.
Exactly. And when nurses feel supported and valued, they're more likely to stay in their jobs.
Which, with the nursing shortage, is a big deal.
It's huge. It reduces those turnover costs.
Yeah.
So there might be some upfront costs to implementing these initiatives, but in the long run, the benefits far outweigh those costs.
So let's get practical.
Okay.
What can hospital administrators actually do to start fostering psychological safety in their organizations?
The first thing is to make it a priority. It needs to be embedded in the hospital's mission and values.
Not just a buzzword.
Right. It needs to be in everything they do.
Okay.
One action is to provide leadership training focused on psychological safety.
So give managers and supervisors the skills they need.
Exactly. Teach them how to really listen, give constructive feedback, and create that safe environment.
Yeah, you can't just expect people to know how to do this.
Right.
They need the tools.
And it's not just about training. It's about creating systems that support psychological safety, like those anonymous reporting channels we talked about, regularly psychological safety assessments, building that infrastructure.
For communication.
Exactly. And it's also important to celebrate and reward the behaviors that promote psychological safety.
Yeah.
You know, when nurses see that speaking up and giving feedback is valued, it reinforces those positive behaviors.
It's like a positive feedback loop.
Exactly. And finally, track your progress.
Okay.
Collect data on psychological safety and use that information to continuously improve.
Make it a data-driven process.
Absolutely. By analyzing trends and seeing what needs work, hospitals can build a culture of learning and growth, which ultimately leads to a safer and more effective healthcare system.
So we've talked a lot about the theory behind psychological safety.
Yeah.
We've explored this SAFE framework, but I think what really brings it home are the real-world examples.
Absolutely. You know, I want to share some stories from hospitals that have actually put this into practice and seen amazing results.
I love that. It makes it feel more real.
Yeah. So one example is a big urban hospital that was dealing with a lot of medical errors and high nurse burnout. They decided to make psychological safety a top priority.
Okay.
Started with leadership training and those anonymous reporting channels we talked about.
So they gave people a way to speak up without fear.
Exactly. And you know what's interesting?
What?
At first, the number of incidents they got actually went up,
Oh, wow.
but that was a good thing.
Okay.
It meant people were finally comfortable coming forward.
It's like all those problems were hidden before.
Exactly. And by addressing those issues and creating a more supportive environment, they saw those medical errors go down.
Wow.
Morale went up and nurse turnover decreased.
It proves that investing in psychological safety is good for everyone.
It really is. And another great example is a children's hospital.
Okay.
They started a peer mentorship program all about psychological safety.
I love that.
They paired up experienced nurses with new grads,
Yeah.
gave them a safe space to talk about challenges, ask questions, practice speaking up.
Especially for new grads. I think that's so important.
It combats that feeling of being alone,
Right.
builds a sense of community.
Yeah.
And the results were amazing.
What happened?
New grads stayed longer, teamwork improved, communication got better, the whole environment was more positive.
That's awesome. It shows how a little mentorship can go a long way.
It really is the power of connection and support.
Yeah.
These are just two examples, but there are hospitals all over
Right.
embracing psychological safety and seeing incredible things happen.
It's really inspiring.
It is.
So we've covered a lot today.
We have.
We talked about the SAFE framework, heard some inspiring stories, and I think it's clear how important psychological safety is for nurses, for patients, for the whole system.
Absolutely.
But what's one thing our listeners can do, like right now,
Yeah.
to start building a more psychologically safe environment?
I'd say just start talking about it.
Okay.
Talk to your colleagues about psychological safety. Share what you learned from this podcast. Ask them how they feel. Do they feel safe speaking up, sharing ideas, asking for help?
Just opening up that conversation.
Exactly. That's where it starts.
And for those in leadership roles, think about how you lead. Are you creating that space where people feel safe, coming to you with concerns,
Are you really listening?
validating their perspectives.
Giving feedback that helps them grow.
That's about always trying to improve.
It is. It's a journey, not a destination.
And every step we take towards psychological safety makes a difference.
Absolutely. It creates positive change for us and our patients.
Well said. I hope our listeners feel empowered to champion psychological safety in their own work.
Me too. We all have a role to play.
And together, we can make healthcare a place where every nurse feels safe, supported, and truly valued.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And before we go, don't forget to check out our website, healthcarenurses.net.
Yes, lots of great resources there.
Articles, checklists, even templates to help you put the SAFE framework into action.
And if you haven't already, download the Nurses Link Up app.
Available on Apple and Google Play.
It's a great way to connect with other nurses, share your experiences, and build that community.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into psychological safety.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Healthcare Nurses Network podcast. Until next time, stay safe, stay connected, and keep advocating for psychological safety.